John Thompson led a quiet routine in his small and modest home on the outskirts of Chicago. The house, simple yet cozy, was a reflection of his honorable life as a truck driver. Widowed for many years, John dedicated his life to raising his grandchildren, Lucas and Michael, after the tragic death of his daughter and son-in-law. John's pride in his grandchildren was palpable, and he always spoke of them with a twinkle in his eye to his co-workers and the few friends he had. One Saturday morning, John was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Lucas and Michael approached. Lucas, the eldest, held some papers in his hand. "Grandpa, we need to talk to you," Lucas said, trying to appear calm. "Of course, my boy. What's the matter?" John replied, curious. "It's about the house. We want to make sure you're always safe," Michael began with a serious tone. "We think it would be good to transfer the property into our names so we can take care of everything for you." John looked at his grandsons, feeling a wave of emotion. "They want to take care of me," he thought. With a smile on his face, he took the pen that Lucas was offering him. "I trust you, boys. I know you're doing what's best for me," John said, signing the papers without hesitation. Lucas and Michael exchanged glances, a look that John, in his naivety, didn't notice. "Thank you, Grandpa. You'll see it was the best decision," Lucas said, trying to contain the anxiety in his voice. The following days were normal. John continued with his daily tasks, unsuspecting of anything. He felt content and secure, believing his grandsons were just ensuring a better future for him. Every time he thought about signing those papers, he felt proud to have raised such responsible young men. However, a shadow of doubt began to creep in, but he quickly pushed away any negative thoughts. After all, they were his grandsons, his own flesh and blood. How could they have bad intentions? That night, as John prepared for bed, he looked around the house. Every detail, every piece of furniture, every photograph brought back memories of a life of hard work and sacrifice. He sighed, feeling fortunate to have a family that cared so much about him. Days later, John returned from the market with 2 full bags. He walked slowly, greeting the neighbors as usual. He felt content with the simple life he led and with the certainty that his grandsons were taking care of him. Turning the corner, he felt a slight unease, but he brushed off any concerns. When he reached his house, the door was ajar, which was unusual. Pushing the door open and entering, John froze. The house was completely empty. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, everything was gone. "Lucas! Michael!" John called out, but the house responded with oppressive silence. His heart raced, and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He walked through the rooms, unable to believe what he saw. The old wall clock, which had marked the hours of the family for decades, was gone. The curtains were torn, and even his small savings kept in a tin in the kitchen were gone. "What happened here?" John murmured, feeling his legs weaken. Suddenly, a couple appeared at the door. John vaguely recognized them as the new neighbors who had recently moved in. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, a young man with a concerned expression. "Yes, it's me." What's going on?" John stammered. "We bought this house from your grandsons. When we arrived today to move in, we found you here," the woman explained, holding some documents. John took the papers, his hands trembling. The documents clearly showed the sale of the house with his grandson's signatures. He felt a chill run down his spine as reality hit him like a cruel blow. They deceived me," John whispered, feeling himself crumble. Seeing John's anguish, the couple offered help. "Mr. Thompson, can we take you somewhere safe? We have friends who can help," the woman said kindly. John nodded, unable to formulate a coherent response. The pain of the betrayal by the grandchildren he loved so much was unbearable. He felt betrayed and helpless, with the weight of a lifetime crumbling around him. With the help of the couple, John left the house that had been his home for so many years, feeling more lost than ever. As he walked down the street, the sense of emptiness and betrayal accompanied him, making each step heavier and harder to bear. John walked aimlessly through the bustling streets of Chicago, the biting cold of the urban night whipping against his face. He could hardly believe the sequence of events that had led him from his cozy home to this new and cruel reality. With no money and nowhere to go, John found himself lost and helpless. Each night seemed longer and colder than the last. Hunger was a constant presence, and John found himself rummaging through trash cans in search of something to eat. Park benches and the entrances of closed stores became his makeshift shelters. As he walked, the city around him seemed indifferent to his pain. On one of those nights, exhausted and hopeless, John encountered a small group of people in a similar situation. They welcomed him simply, sharing what little they had. Among them was Mark, a former veteran who now led a support group for the homeless. "You look new around here, buddy," Mark said, offering an old but clean blanket. "I lost my home, my grandsons," John began, but emotion choked him. Mark nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "It happens more often than you think. Tomorrow I'll take you to an NGO that can help. They have shelters and hot meals," Mark said, trying to offer some comfort. The next morning, John was taken to the NGO shelter. The environment was simple but welcoming. There, he found other people in difficult situations, all with painful stories. He was given a bed, food, and, for the first time in weeks, a hot shower. The feeling of dignity began to slowly restore itself in his heart. The NGO volunteers were kind and welcoming. Among them was Mary, a middle-aged woman who dedicated her time to helping the needy. She approached John, offering him a plate of hot soup. "Welcome, John. I know it's not easy, but we're here to help," Mary said with a warm smile. Gradually, John began to engage in the shelter's activities. He helped in the kitchen, distributed clothes, and in return, received a small salary that allowed him to buy basic items. Although the pain of betrayal still weighed heavy on his heart, the sense of usefulness brought a new perspective. Months passed, and John slowly began to find a new purpose in his life. He had become a beloved figure in the shelter, respected for his dedication and kindness. However, the longing and sadness for his lost grandchildren never left him. John's work at the NGO led him to many bleak areas of the city, places where hope seemed like a distant memory. One day, as he was distributing food and blankets in a poorly lit alley, something caught his attention. Two young men, huddled against the wall, appeared to be in terrible condition. When John approached, his heart nearly stopped as he recognized Lucas and Michael. "Lucas? Michael," he called out, his voice trembling with disbelief and pain. The grandsons slowly lifted their heads, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow and lifeless. Lucas, the eldest, seemed even more deteriorated. John fell to his knees before them, feeling a mixture of shock, anger, and compassion. "Grandpa," Michael murmured, almost too weakly. "What happened to you?" John asked, tears streaming down his face. Lucas tried to speak, but his voice faltered. He was too weak. In desperation, John looked around and signaled to Mark, who was helping with the distribution. "We need to get them to the shelter, now!" John said, urgency clear in his voice. With the help of Mark and other volunteers, John took his grandsons to the shelter. During the journey, he couldn't shake the image of the young men he had raised and loved as sons, now reduced to shadows of what they once were. Upon arriving at the shelter, Mary quickly provided clean clothes, and a volunteer doctor examined the young men. "They're malnourished and dehydrated, but they'll recover with proper care," the doctor said, trying to reassure John. As Lucas and Michael received their first aid, John sat beside them, holding their hands. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. John's heart was torn to see his grandsons in such a state, but he knew the road to recovery would be long and difficult. When the grandsons were finally settled into clean beds, John sat in a chair beside them, unable to leave them alone. He spent the night awake, watching over their restless sleep, reflecting on how everything had come to this point. The mix of emotions was overwhelming, but above all, John felt a renewed sense of hope. He knew the road would be tough, but he was determined to help his grandsons rise again. The following days were marked by a collective effort at the shelter to care for Lucas and Michael. They received regular meals, medical care, and a safe environment to recover. The slow but noticeable transformation brought a mixture of relief and sadness to John's heart. One night, as everyone was getting ready for bed, Lucas, still fragile, called out for John. "Grandpa, can we talk?" His voice was a whisper, laden with guilt and remorse. John nodded and sat beside Lucas's bed. Michael, on the other side of the room, listened attentively, unable to look directly at his grandfather. "We're so sorry for what we did," Lucas began, tears in his eyes. "We were desperate, Grandpa. We thought we could get easy money, but we lost our way." John looked at his grandsons, his heart heavy. He had spent sleepless nights trying to understand what had led them to this point. Now, seeing their vulnerability, he felt a wave of compassion. "I raised you to be better men," John said, his voice choked. "I never imagined you would do this, but I understand now that I also failed you. We should have talked more, faced our problems together." Michael, crying, finally found the courage to speak. "Forgive us, Grandpa. We were so blinded by greed and addiction that we didn't think about the consequences." John held his grandson's hands, tears flowing freely. "I forgive you. We all make mistakes. What's important is that we're here now, and we can start over," John said with gentle firmness. The embrace that followed was filled with emotion. The room seemed warmer, brighter, as if John's forgiveness had ignited a flame of hope. Over time, Lucas and Michael began to participate in the shelter's activities, helping other needy individuals just as John did. Their presence brought new energy to the place, and together they began to rebuild their lives. John knew the road would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt they were on the right path. He had found a new family in the shelter community, and with his grandsons by his side, he was determined to make each day count. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and leave your thoughts in the comments below, sharing what you think or suggesting new stories. And to stay updated on all the latest content,